Hello ladies, MBs and gents. This video is a response of sorts to a video by Theremin Trees and Qualia Soup called The Value of Offence. I found the video to be a bit weird. Theremin Trees and Qualia Soup aren't your typical YouTube atheists, not least because they're actually intelligent. They're not the sort of people to tout nonsensical beliefs in free speech absolutism. In their video, they do acknowledge that there are limitations that are necessary for free speech to function as a useful right in society. I went over a fair few of these things in a video I made a while back called Free Speech versus Free Speech, which I shall link in the description. However, despite this acknowledgement, I can't help but feel it's being made begrudgingly, not least because the video concludes with a quite alarming defence of the far-right hate group that is the men's rights movement. I can hope that this defence has been made naively, not insidiously, though even if the former, there is no excuse for self-proclaimed skeptics being this ill-informed of an issue they've chosen to discuss. I don't wish to discuss every single portion of their video in its entirety, so I would encourage you, the viewer, to watch their video for yourselves. I want to begin at the end, if that isn't too confusing.
Sometimes, dialoguing with parties we've judged as offensive can lead to surprising results. Talking with extreme candour about her experiences interviewing leaders and followers of the men's rights movement, formerly self-defined feminist filmmaker Cassie J has described how her pre-existing views of the movement prevented her from listening to what her interviewees were saying. J reflected, "In those moments, sitting across from my enemy, I wasn't listening. I was waiting to hear a sentence, or even just a couple of words in succession, that proved what I wanted to believe. I would often hear an innocent and valid point that a men's rights activist would make. But in my head, I would add on to their statement a sexist or anti-woman spin, assuming that's what they wanted to say, but didn't." Jay cited an instance where a men's rights activist asked, "Where is justice for the man who was falsely accused of raping a woman and is branded with the inescapable title of rapist?" Jay said she heard, "A woman being raped isn't a big deal." Over time, she realized many offensive attitudes she'd previously attributed to her enemy group were false.
For starters, if there's one thing that definitely doesn't convince me of the validity of a political position or ideology, it's the mere testimony of a convert, especially if said convert has a vested financial interest in being such. In my life, I've encountered atheists who used to be Christians, Christians who used to be atheists, feminists who used to be anti-feminists, anti-feminists who used to be feminists, vegans who used to be omnivores, omnivores who used to be vegans, and so on and so on. While the testimony of a convert can certainly be interesting to listen to, I am somewhat baffled as to how much weight certain people give to this testimony. When Cassie J first presented this documentary to the world, the overwhelming reaction from anti-feminists seemed to be one of utter joy that a former prominent feminist had denounced her feminism. My reaction was more along the lines of, who the fuck is Cassie J? The prominence, as well as the supposed previously held commitment of these converts, all too often seems to have the air of revisionism around it. Something very telling is Cassie J's closing remark in her documentary. "I no longer call myself a feminist, but I am still an advocate of women's rights, and always will be, and I am adding men to the discussion." Adding men to the discussion? Surely a prominent and committed feminist would know that men have been involved in the discussion surrounding gender issues for decades. It takes a special kind of arrogance for someone as young as Cassie J to assume that they are somehow breaking ground when they are in fact dismissing the hard work of many people who came before them. I noticed something similar when Lacey Green proudly announced she was going to start dialoguing with anti-feminists. There were claims that she was somehow changing the game, despite the glaring fact that feminists already have been dialoguing with anti-feminists for ages. Even if one limits their research to YouTube, which sadly many do, plenty of examples of feminists directly engaging with their opponents can be found. Secondly, we need to look at some of the people Cassie J chose to interview in her documentary. She interviewed Paul Elam, who is on record as having said that women are begging to be raped. She interviewed Warren Farrell, who is on record as having defended the incestuous abuse of young girls by their fathers. Are we seriously to believe that because these people said some non-misogynistic things in a documentary, that somehow negates the obviously misogynistic and vile comments they have made in the past? That's as ridiculous as a Christian responding to criticisms of all the horrific things contained within the Bible by demanding that we instead focus on all the nice things contained within the Bible. It doesn't wash. Further, are we seriously to believe that in researching her documentary that Cassie J somehow missed what it takes only a couple of minutes to find on the internet? What kind of professional filmmaker does that? The fact that the various MRAs interviewed in a film made for an audience beyond the man-children of the internet chose not to say things like this, if anything, demonstrates that they recognise the value of not being offensive. As I said earlier, I can hope that this defence has been made naively, not insidiously, though even if the former, there is no excuse for self-proclaimed skeptics being this ill-informed of an issue they've chosen to discuss.
When scholars are prevented from speaking at universities because people dislike what they say, this usually results in far more publicity for the scholar, whose visit might otherwise pass without much attention.
And with that in mind, you'd think the fans of these speakers and the speakers themselves would embrace the backlash they receive. But no. Contrary to popular belief, not all publicity is good publicity.
When we allow controversial books, films, music, and speakers, we can openly examine and discuss them, possibly exposing their flaws, but retaining the opportunity to think and increase our understanding. Those who don't want to hear a message they personally find offensive can choose not to listen, but what they have no right to do is impose their choices upon others by preventing them from listening.
When people are using a platform, especially an academic one, to promote sexual abuse, the harassment of transgender people, or the exposing of the personal details of undocumented immigrants, then we are dealing with an issue far, far greater than that of simply offence. The victims of this sort of astonishingly irresponsible and hateful behaviour are not merely at risk of hurt feelings, they are at risk of a very real physical violence from either other citizens or from the state itself. The issue here is not even comparable to something as trivial as a your mum joke, and it is horribly ignorant of you to not recognise this and absurd to suggest that these problems can simply be solved by not listening, or by ignoring the person and hoping they'll simply go away. Universities are institutions we trust to provide us with well-researched information about the world that meets the high standards of academic rigour. For universities to hand over platforms to just anyone is for them to undermine that trust. Hard-right pundits are well aware of the credibility that comes with being associated to a university and are keen to either attain, at least on a superficial level, that credibility for themselves, or to undermine that credibility by attempting to disrupt the academic process. Saying we don't want this kind of nonsense in universities isn't censorship so much as it is accuracy. It's like a librarian moving a fiction book they find in the non-fiction section back to the fiction section. Even if they harbour deep personal hatred of fiction books and derive some ideological satisfaction from the act of reshelving the book, there's nothing morally questionable about the act itself. Similarly, if right-wing pundits wish to express themselves, they have any number of platforms from which to do so, ranging from blogs, vlogs, printed literature, and even talks they arrange themselves at private function suites. Academia does not owe them a platform, any more than it owes an 8-year-old a platform to talk about how awesome they think Pokemon is, and it should be obvious to everybody how absurd it would be to accuse a university of censorship because they refuse to grant said 8-year-old a platform. Notably, in 2017, a film entitled Vaxxed, which promotes the thoroughly discredited claim made by Andrew Wakefield that vaccines cause autism, was aired at Regent's University in London. This wasn't just any screening either, it was the UK premiere of the film. Are we to believe it was mere coincidence that a university was chosen as the location of this premiere, or do we recognise this as an attempt to give Vaxxed at least a superficial veneer of academic credibility? The university themselves stated that they had been unaware of the kind of film they were playing host to and that they would be more careful in future. Was this an act of censorship on the part of Regents, or was it just them recognising their own responsibility as a university not to promote anti-academic nonsense?
It's not just the right of the person who speaks to be heard, explains Christopher Hitchens, summarising sentiments expressed by John Milton, Thomas Paine, and John Stuart Mill. It is the right of everyone in the audience to listen and to hear. And every time you silence someone, you make yourself a prisoner of your own action, because you deny yourself the right to hear something. In other words, your own right to hear and be exposed is as much involved in all these cases as is the right of the other to voice his or her view. If all in society were agreed on the truth and beauty and value of one proposition, all except one person, it would be most important. In fact, it would become even more important that one heretic be heard, because we would still benefit from his perhaps outrageous or appalling view. Hitchens warns, don't take refuge in the false security of consensus and feeling that whatever you think you're bound to be okay because you're in the safely moral majority.
Unfortunately for fans of Christopher Hitchens, he was a hypocrite, as demonstrated here.
I'll be very brief. It's
No,
important.
No, it's okay.
Go away. Go away. Go away. We don't want fascist crackpots taking up our meeting. Thank you. Go away. Go away.
Different panel.
Fascist crackpot.
Different.
Fascist crackpot. We're
Different
here.
panel.
We're not here to talk to you. Throw him out.
Sir.
Throw him out.
Here, sir.
Throw him out. No.
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 I
Next.
have exercised my discretion as a moderator. Could you please
His mic
sit
is
down
off. His mic
and
is off. Sir.
Let him ask the question. I don't think you're going to shut him up.
No. Can't bring it on.
It's about the
This
subject.
gentleman has the floor.
Okay.
Security. Security, please. Out you go. Go away. No.
Sir, why don't you ask your...
sir, over here.
No, go away.
All right, thank you. I believe that I've been offered the opportunity to ask the question.
Yes. Go.
No. No,
The answer
go
is no.
away.
Well, I think you should let him ask the question. Why don't you
Next.
Okay.
Because you
Thank you.
But I don't just wish to appeal to his hypocrisy. You see, when Hitchens talks of the heretic with the outrageous or appalling view, he is of course talking about himself, given as that's how he was and still is viewed by the religious people whose beliefs he chose to speak out against. Though eloquently worded, an inevitable consequence of the education privilege affords some, all Hitchens is really saying here is, listen to me. You see, Hitchens is someone afforded every social privilege you can name, from a financially well-off background, white, straight, cisgender, male, able-bodied, able-minded, etc., etc., etc. As such, he faced in his life barely a fraction of the abuse and degradation his lesser privileged equivalents do. With that in mind, it's very easy for him to speak of empowering the voices of the outrageous and appalling, when for him it's a purely hypothetical exercise. The moment his bubble of privilege is intruded upon, even slightly, and his principles are tested, not just hypothetically, but practically, we see this.
Go away. Go away. Go away. We don't want fascist crackpots taking up our meeting. Thank you. Go away.
It is quite absurd to suggest that women, ethnic minorities, gender and sexual minorities, and any other marginalised group could possibly be making their way through daily life somehow without hearing the various outrageous and appalling opinions others have about them, so much so that they would actually need to enable special platforms for such people. Contrastingly, however, it is not absurd to realise that members of socially privileged groups may well be ignorant of the views of the underprivileged. However, within subcultures such as New Atheism, we see not only a predominance of the socially privileged, but we see a fierce backlash against any attempt to amplify the voices of the underprivileged. It's almost as though they're, taking refuge in the false security of consensus. I reiterate, we need to listen to opposing views. A lot of the time simply means, listen to me.
But he made an exception in the case of what we might call incitement. Mill writes, an opinion that corn dealers are starvers of the poor, or that private property is robbery, ought to be unmolested when simply circulated through the press, but may justly incur punishment when delivered orally to an excited mob assembled before the house of a corn dealer. For some, inciting a mob to riot is an unambiguous act of harm. But for Thomas Scanlon, things aren't so clear-cut. He points out that when an individual hears the inciter's opinion, it becomes subject to that individual's own judgment. The individual isn't merely a mindless machine set in motion by the inciter. Individuals have personal responsibility for their own actions. Scanlon contrasts the inciter's act of merely expressing an opinion with the act of a criminal accomplice, an agent who provides others with tools to facilitate a crime, like the key to a bank, or technical information, like the combination to a safe. He also distinguishes inciters from those who threaten and intimidate people into performing harmful acts. Of course, some inciters do more than merely express an opinion. Some actively groom their audience, cultivating compliance to the group by rewarding agreement, punishing dissent, and maintaining ignorance. By bringing in the element of undue influence, and thereby exerting greater power, they take on greater responsibility for any resulting harm.
Agreed, and this perfectly describes the problem with channels such as these. That is to say that they show no measure of responsibility for the undue level of influence they wield over their subscribers. But this is what I meant when I said earlier, I can't help but feel this acknowledgement is being made begrudgingly, not least because the video concludes with a quite alarming defence of the far-right hate group that is the men's rights movement, not least because the men's rights movement has chosen to associate itself with and actively promote the content of these appallingly misogynistic channels. I'll try and explain the worthlessness of offence like this. Let's look at some things some people have said. First, the previously mentioned comment from Paul Elam about how women are supposedly begging to be raped. Is this offensive? Certainly yes. It would be very difficult to argue otherwise, though rest assured if his supporters discover this video they will push pedantry to breaking point trying. Next question, is this offence valuable? No, not even remotely. This comment in no way challenges anyone's political views or philosophy. It's purely an attack on a group of people, i.e. women, that serves the sole purpose of venting a bitter hatred for said group of people. This offence is worthless. What about a comment like, feminism is cancer? Is this offensive? Well, perhaps, though on a personal level I don't find it so much offensive as much as I find it tedious and childish. But let's not split hairs. Let's for the sake of argument say that it is offensive. Is this offence valuable? No. While this comment is attacking a political position certain people hold, it isn't doing so in a manner anywhere near nuanced enough to be of any value. The phrase feminism is cancer doesn't tell us anything at all about feminism, rather it tells us something about the person saying the phrase. This is why I find it baffling that certain people expect us to debate these individuals in the marketplace of ideas. Debate what, exactly? For something to be worthy of debate in the marketplace of ideas, surely it needs to actually be an idea of some sort. Let's look at something else. What about a well-cited critique of some feminist argument or other that demonstrates good understanding of the argument and generally good engagement with the relevant literature and that seeks to improve rather than undermine the broader discussion of gender in society in general? Would that be valuable? Absolutely it would. In fact, it's just those sorts of critiques that have helped the academic and political discussion surrounding gender advance as much as it has over the decades. This sort of disagreement is very much encouraged within feminist discourse. However, you might have noticed I skipped a question there, the question of, would this be offensive? I can only truly speak for myself here, but personally I would not find such a thing offensive, nor can I imagine any of the feminists I know finding such a thing offensive. And as stated, feminism has thrived off all of these sorts of things over the decades. Such academic critiques, however, are very unlikely to be something you will see from anti-feminists anytime soon. Indeed, such people generally consider the very idea that they put even the slightest amount of effort into researching what they've already decided they are vehemently opposed to be preposterous. Thank you for watching. Comments will remain open so long as comments remain constructive and civil. Anything that is not constructive and civil is, well, pretty worthless, at least to me.